Well, you see, the word responsible, it's in the word, response. Able. You have to be able to respond. It's part of what moral responsibility is.
Well, but it's the nature of the procession. If you proceed from the source that is a father, then you must be a son and an only son because of the nature of a procession. Have you ever heard the word procession? Have you paid heed to the prefix pro in the word procession?
This is gonna be stuff like that. Like it just doesn't.
But this is to go even further beyond. This isn't even my final thought.
Okay, hello to everyone who is watching. This is a good unbelieving buddy of mine, Frank. He's been kind enough to come on and discuss some things about epistemology. He comes from an evolutionary reliabilist type of stance, a subset of that particular kind of view. Under the view link that I shared, I put a reference. I put this little conversation that we had with MK, now Jesus, You, Me, I think is his name. And we had this little conversation maybe last week or a couple days ago, I can't remember now. But it sort of sparked off this conversation on epistemology and human nature and how all these things relate. And so what we're going to try to do here is see if we can't get a good understanding of each other's views and ask questions and maybe challenge each other a little bit. So from there, Frank, maybe you could sort of give a rough outline of what we're going for here and your perspective.
Yeah. So since this is essentially the epistemological point, the penultimate proposition is my cognitive faculties are trustworthy, and as a presuppositionalist, Jimmy will say that Christianity is necessary for that. And what I'm going to say is that that it's not necessary. That something like evolution, not purely biological evolution. I'll bring in other concepts, but something like evolution is sufficient to account for the reliability of our cognitive faculties. We need not bring in God. I'm willing and open to the idea that a God exists, but I believe that I can start off with assuming my cognitive faculties are reliable before I reach that conclusion, whereas I think Jimmy would disagree. So my view is sort of stratified on 2, possibly 3 levels. There is biological evolution, and then there's cultural evolution, often called memetics, and then I would say sort of like an evolution of self, but I haven't developed that idea very well yet. So I believe that biological evolution sort of gives us the hardware for the reliability of our cognitive faculties, and that cultural evolution gives us the software, or the theories and science and all that kind of stuff, the actual beliefs we have. But the actual, so it's the content of the cognitive faculties versus the cognitive faculties themselves. I believe that any view that is worth having is a view that's capable of being wrong. That if you believe that your cognitive faculties are always trustworthy rather than just generally trustworthy, that is to say, you believe you're omniscient, you have a problem. If you believe that they're never trustworthy, that is to say, you are necessarily ignorant, you have a problem. I believe that the golden middle there, the golden mean, is my cognitive faculties are generally trustworthy. That means my view must let me be wrong sometimes, so that learning is possible, so that I account for my own humanness, my own infallibility. My own fallibility.
Can I ask a question at that point?
Go ahead.
So, and you're, I'm assuming this is the case. Your position is that your faculties are generally reliable, and where they are wrong, the mechanism that you're employing for knowledge, your cognitive faculties are capable of self-correction. You can look at. Okay. Maybe you can.
You have to have something like that to have a meaningful. You're either if you do not want to commit yourself to omniscience, right? That to me is a bad epistemology. You don't want to be omniscient. So too, you don't want to be perfectly ignorant. You don't want to be you don't want to force yourself into a universal skepticism. A good epistemology is somewhere in the middle. Where in the middle, I'm not sure. Ideally, the better epistemology will be the one that lets you have the most knowledge without being omniscient. So it avoids something like logical omniscience. It avoids something like complete omniscience. So there's like complete omniscience, there's logical omniscience, and there's various different things that certain theories, like Bayesianism and the like, have issues with. But I want something which admits that, which recognizes my ability to become wrong, right? My ability to reach false conclusions. Clearly, we are capable of doing so. This is one of those things that are pre-reflectively obvious, right? In the past, if my cognitive faculties are reliable, assuming that in the past they have been wrong, like I have reached false conclusions, I have been corrected, or at least I think I have. Maybe I was corrected wrongly as well. I want to be able. That seems to be something that a good epistemology has to be able to make sense of: the ability to become wrong and then to correct yourself. So yeah, correction is of fundamental importance. So how do I account for my ability to do so? So again, two levels: social, and biological. So the way I see it is that for on the biological level, we need the brain and the mental system. The mental, like you have mind and brain, so you're going to have issues with substance dualism and whatnot. But the on the mental side, you want your beliefs, so you want your cognitive faculties, which is just your reasoning, your senses, and your memory, to be generally reliable. So it's not cognitive faculties are generally reliable. Stratify that up. That's belief. That's reasoning, senses, memory. You could probably add in imagination, I guess, but I don't know how that would be, how you would judge reliability of imagination. And I like thinking in threes, so screw imagination. So each one of those. Go ahead.
So can I just ask? So it seems to me like you have this is actually a pretty standard and I think meritorious description of how the sort of three levels of a person in society. You have the stuff that they're made of. You have the biological factor. You have the psychological factor, which is like that individual as a human agent and consciousness and that sort of thing. And then you have the sociological factor, which depending on. So would you say that those are sort of are those words?
I believe that I define my like how some people will talk about the definition of man. My definition of man is roughly, like I'll add on to it sometimes, but we are social rational animals. So you have our animal aspect, you have the rational aspect, and you have the social aspect. The animal takes in our emotions, our desires, but also our physical parts. The rational takes in our reasoning, abduction, induction, deduction, etc. It also and then social takes in our need for others, our need to learn, our need for creativity, and a whole bunch of other things. And without all three of these things, you're not happy. Like, I know that from experience. I have social issues, so whatever. I know. So yeah, you have these three. Like, I think John Frame talks about tri-perspectivalism. I haven't read much of it. Like, I've read like one or two things. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, John. Yeah, that's actually really. So I am.
The vague idea of tri-perspectivalism has influenced me. I haven't actually read most of his stuff though. Okay.
Yeah, no. So I that's funny. I sort of caught on to that, and I really like. I have my disagreements with Frame, but one thing that I think he's very good for pointing out in the Christian perspective is the concept of a perspectival use of language. And what that means is, like, as I was just saying, like, we can call these things different things. We can call the psychological factor the rational factor, the individual factor. We can call it the mind. We can call it the consciousness. We can call it all these different things. And using language in this more stipulative fashion lets us look at this, this one object of thought from different angles. It lets us look at it from different perspectives. And so that's sort of Frame's, perspectival use of language is really useful, because then we can come back and say, well, what, if I think about it this way, I can see all these other aspects of the thing. And so here, what you're pointing out is really good, right? There's an animal aspect to man, his biology. There's a psychological aspect to man, his rationality and his phenomenology and all that sort of thing. And then there's a social aspect to man, which is his place as a member of a larger culture, as a larger unit, how that sort of defines him. Memetics, as he said, to use. I think Dawkins came up with that idea, right?
Cultural evolution is the idea, right? So yeah.
Right.
Well, where was I? Biology. So, relationship between cognitive faculties and biology. I'm not going to explain evolution. You know that things are selected for or selected against. I'm not going to go over that. Hopefully, people who watch this understand evolution. If not, there's plenty of stuff in the Great Debate community and elsewhere.
Maybe we can just give like a general definition. Like, would you say it's? Go ahead.
Evolution requires some imperfectly self-replicating thing. Particularly, biological evolution requires. Since my idea of evolution is more than biological, I guess I should. So in biological evolution, you have animals, or you have really any sexually reproducing, or it can be asexual reproduction as well, like with cells and stuff. But I'll keep with sexual reproduction. You have sexually reproducing animals, which so they're replicating themselves. They are reproducing, and when they reproduce imperfectly. That these two, technically, because they're two different entities, it's necessarily going to be imperfect because there's going to be a gene transfer or whatever it's called. But you can think of the father is reproducing himself by the mother, but the child is not an exact copy, right? There is something different about the child, right? And now what causes that difference is a whole bunch of things. Normally people think mutation, but there's also recombination, genetic drift, a whole bunch of different things which are part of the reason why the child is different from the father. And what evolution says is, well, just that is enough to let things change over time. But what evolution adds on to that is this idea of a selective process, specifically natural selection. Natural selection will select out on certain types of non-adaptable traits which come from this imperfect self-replication, and it will select and it will favor traits which are good for, or it doesn't have to be stronger, better, faster. It could just be whatever the environment is. Like maybe being smaller, maybe being slower, maybe being weaker is actually better because the environment wants you to be weaker.
So it's more compatible. They become more compatible with the environment.
Yeah. So whatever is more compatible with the environment. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I'm gonna write that down somewhere. I gotta get my notes out.
So really quick. So because I just want to ask this. Well, actually, let me put it this way. So in this conversation, I'm just going to assume evolutionary biology for the sake of argument. I'm not going to argue with it, but I will. I'm not trying to be dishonest here. I'm not a proponent of evolution. I don't. I'm agnostic towards it. I think it's. I have
no problem with people being agnostic towards evolution. I don't have any.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm pointing out here is I don't want to challenge you on evolution at all. Like I want to give you that for the sake of argument so that we can get to
the
epistemological stuff.
If we ever address your view, though, if that happens during this conversation, I think it's fine for you not to assume it. But I guess like when you're talking about my view, right? So I don't have to defend both this philosophy and evolution at the same time.
Exactly. And so that leads me to this next question, which just is it okay if, on my view, things like common ancestry and speciation and all these things are possible, so long as the selection process is not totally natural?
Yeah, I have no problem with other forms of selection. Like I even said earlier on, I sort of said a selection process, specifically natural selection, but like there's other types of selection, I would say. And if something like evolutionary creationism or ID is true, then you could different models of ID and different ideas of evolutionary creationism allow for a selective process. Well, I mean, like evolutionary creationism, which could just say that. Natural selection is divine selection, while something like ID will say that natural selection isn't sufficient. Right? There is natural selection, but there isn't. But the evidence says that there isn't enough time or space or whatever for macroevolution to have happened. So you need God in like the explosive events, like the the Cambrian explosion. You need God to seed in new ideas, new genetic information, and so that wouldn't be not merely natural selection, but an artificial selection, specifically divine artificial selection. So, as opposed to maybe like a human artificial selection or something like this. I don't know if artificial selection is the right term because I think that's used for other things, but it's artificial in the philosophical sense of
Right, I follow you.
but some
Yeah.
is doing it.
Right.
Or what's that?
Cool. So you were talking about. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was talking about so again, I need to give some argument for how evolution lets my cognitive faculties be reliable, and so I've explained evolution. Wait, did I finish explaining evolution? Yeah, natural selection.
I think so. Yeah, you have change over time of of various sorts, and it has to do with this selection process where things become things that are incompatible with the environment just kind of tend to
die out.
Things that are more compatible tend to
become more common, and things which are neutrally compatible
become more common. That's the right word for it.
There's a regression towards a mean and stuff like that, all kinds of lovely math and whatever. So what the thesis I need to put forth now with this idea is that for an animal to survive in pretty much any environment, whatever cognitive faculties it has to be generally reliable. Now, generally here being a lovely relative term, generally for humans is going to be different generally for animals. So a butterfly's cognitive faculties are fundamentally different than a human's cognitive faculties. I don't think a plant has cognitive faculties, but my idea is that once the cognitive faculties come into existence, once you have a brain, once you have a nervous system, there's going to be some type of cognition going on. There's going to be a reaction to the environment on an immediate, like moment-to-moment level rather than a species-to-species level. Plants will just naturally grow really slowly, and they can't, and to whatever extent they can respond to their environment, it's extremely slow. Whereas something like with a nervous system, an animal, i.e. an animal, they will adapt spontaneously to their environments. And I think there are certain, I think the whole animal, to be an animal is to have a nervous system, but I'm not sure. I think it might be a smaller order. So for now, I'm going to not talk about plants and stuff. I'm going to talk about sexually reproducing animals. Maybe I might have to defend something on there, but for now, I'm not going to. So in the sexually reproducing animals, that is to say they have nervous systems, they have some sort of cognitive faculties, their behaviors are going to be selected upon by the environment. So if they behave in a way that is not adaptable, they will die. If they behave in a way that is adaptable, they will survive. Now, the classic argument which preempts the general intuition that that is enough to, like, well, their behavior, our ideas influence our behavior, right? Our mental states, our cognitive faculties influence our behavior. There's two arguments against this. First, and then they're both basically forms of the evolutionary argument against naturalism. One is a philosophy of mind formulation of it, which I get from Aaron Voluntarist, and the other is just Plantinga's formulation of the evolutionary argument against naturalism. So, and I'm trying to address both technically. So I'll start with Plantinga's. Plantinga effectively is trying to say that he sort of grants that the mind, there is some interaction between mind and matter, right? Aaron Voluntarist, who's like a guy on the interwebs who's cool and intelligent and whatnot, he doesn't grant that, right? He's an idealist of sorts, I think. So he says, you have to argue for this. But assuming that I have been granted that mind can affect matter, that my belief states are that the brain states which are correlated with the belief states, or the brain states which are correlated with reasoning. So these objective states of the brain have correlated reasoning, first-person subjective states, and those first-person subjective states have some relation with the brain states which result in behavior. We can say that, forgoing a whole bunch of philosophy of mind, our cognitive faculties are the reason we behave in certain ways. So the immediate inference one might want to make before the evolutionary argument is put forth against naturalism is put forth is we should be able to, if cognitive faculties cause behavior, and behavior is selected for on the environment, then the only we need to have reliable cognitive faculties because we need to have reliable behavior. Reliable behavior is just adaptable behavior, and reliable cognitive faculties are cognitive faculties which tell us the truth about the world. The evolutionary argument against naturalism comes in and gives counterexamples how that's not always true. The primordial example of Plantinga is this example of a tiger or a lion. So we might imagine that some stupid individual comes upon a lion or a tiger or whatnot, and he sees the lion or tiger sleeping there, and he has the lovely idea of, oh, tigers make great friends. But the best way to survive this is to run away from the tiger. I mean, the best way to make friends with the tiger is to run away, or to lie here silently until it leaves, right? Something like that. Well, naturally, if he had actually, if he walked up to the tiger as though it was as to make friends, the tiger would kill him. So the behavior of getting near the tiger is not adaptable. It's not survivable. It's not a reliable behavior. The behavior of sitting still and running away are adaptable, survivable, reliable behaviors. But,
can I jump in here real quick?
Go ahead.
Oh yeah. So the and would you agree that the key, the sort of the fountainhead of Plantinga's argument is to make this distinction between true beliefs, beliefs that have the truth condition for knowledge, and beliefs which are pragmatic but untrue. Right? They serve the purpose of survival. And Plantinga's point is to divide the concepts of survival or environmental compatibility that we were talking about before and knowledge. He's trying to argue they don't imply each other in the way that would be necessary for cognitive, for the general reliability of cognitive faculties on evolution.
I'm going to what I'm ultimately going to do is half agree with Plantinga. I'm going to agree with him that there is a division. I'm going to disagree that the division doesn't still require us to have cognitive faculties. And I'm going to do that with just how evolution works. I feel that he has misunderstood evolution in some sense, or he's underestimated evolution at the very least. Not misunderstood it, but like he's not thought through it as much as he could.
Cool. I think that really quick. That to me, that to me is sort of the issue here, which to go to the arguments that are not necessarily planting as like the general overall problem has from philosophers who argue against and theologians and apologists and all other kinds of people who have argued against sort of an argument for human rationality from progressive change in existence or human nature, or whatever it is. This argument has been around, since Heraclitus.
Yes,
but that general idea, that general idea has been argued against by saying nothing about the progressiveness or survivability or what have you of the change in an animal necessitates knowledge in the animal. They don't seem to require each other in the way that would be sufficient to say, oh, this explains knowledge or human rationality or what have you.
And yeah,
just basically just to say that seems. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
About what I should be talking about. I'm addressing like what people want me to. Okay, so the idea is that there's a difference between the truth of a belief and whether or not the belief is pragmatic, whether or not the belief results in behavior which is itself adaptable. So the idea is that there is this correlation between belief and behavior, and the property and whether or not a belief is going to be selected for is determined on whether or not a behavior is going to be selected for. But the behavior which is characteristic of having a true belief is just as survivable as the behavior which is characteristic of having certain false beliefs. So in this case, the idiot who thinks that the best way to make friends with say, a lion is to stay completely still behind the bushes or to run away, rather than to go up and make him friends as he would with everything else. He survives. And so that belief would be, quote unquote, selected for, according to Plantinga. Now, what I say is that evolution, yes, that someone can have a stupid belief, and because they were dumb, survive, precisely because of their ignorance. But the way that mental faculties are selected for is not as direct. Mental faculties are selected for in a more holistic way, whereas whereas actions are selected for individually. Behaviors are selected for on an individual basis by natural selection. There's other I'll talk about what I call social selection. I don't know if mimetic selection. I haven't really read anything by Dawkins. I just know like the Wikipedia stuff. I haven't actually read his Selfish Gene. I intend to eventually. But
And neither have I, for the record. Let me just raise my hand to that humility there.
Like I will talk about like these other types of selection which I think are compatible with atheism, and how I might think they work. But natural selection, I would say, selects for behaviors on an individual case. Just like natural selection on the holistic level, the whole which is selected for is species, right? Natural selection, as Darwin said, is the origin of the species, not the origin of the individual. It's nor is it the origin of life, right? Abiogenesis is the theory which accounts for the origin of life from a naturalistic viewpoint. But evolution is the origin of species via natural selection and whatever the name of the book was. But behaviors, just as like individual persons, are parts of this greater whole. But I would say that the way that cognitive faculties are selected for are on how is more statistic. It's how often they will produce reliable behaviors. So like I really just want to like look up the thing that I wrote.
Yeah, no problem. Can I make a quick comment here real quick, just about maybe some distinctions? Okay. Yeah. So from my perspective, I actually don't have much of a problem, with this tri-perspectival distinction and look at the human animal as having general reliability. If I can jump back just a few topics, I want to agree with you that if you have an epistemology that depends on you being omniscient or in any way invokes that, that's problematic. And if you have an epistemology that reduces to global skepticism, then I think we can agree that's just incoherent from the get-go, because you have to have beliefs, you have to have intellectual commitments in order to doubt all intellectual commitments. So it's just irrational from the outset. And even stronger, just to add to the point you were making, someone who would be functionally omniscient would be a problem. So somebody who would say, well, I'm not omniscient, but whose perspective would mean that their cognitive faculties must be infallible, that they can never be corrected, like you were saying earlier, that whatever they come to believe must count as knowledge, that too is problematic.
Because I lagged out for a second.
Oh, sorry.
I lagged out for like 5 seconds. What did you just say?
Okay, yeah, that's happened to me too here, but I haven't missed anything yet. So let me go back real quick. So all I'm doing is I just want to add the strength of the merit of saying we want to avoid omniscience in epistemology. Like that is a Christian goal as well in epistemology, and what I'm saying is I not only want to avoid omniscience in the general scale, but I want to make that distinction that I think you were implying earlier, which was I also want to avoid functional omniscience, where anytime I have, my cognitive faculties are leading me to believe something, I think it's true. I mean, I will agree with somebody else that I'm not omniscient, but then I will add, oh, but wait a minute, my cognitive faculties are infallible, and I believe X, Y, Z, therefore X, Y, Z must be the case. That sort of functional omniscience is also problematic. The person needs to be, your epistemology needs to provide for rationality, ignorance, and how to distinguish between the two.
Yep.
Right, and I think that's what we've agreed to. And so like the paradigm that I'm coming from is actually rather similar. I think you can look to use the perspective why am I having such a problem with that word? To use the perspectival influence from frame, I think you can look at revelational epistemology from a reliabilist standpoint. I wouldn't call it a reliabilism, but I would say I think it has the merits of reliabilism. What we're saying is God has
agree,
designed.
but I don't think it's compatible with presuppositionalist methodology. I think you would have to go a cumulative case, something like what Maximus Confesses does.
Okay, let me see if I can't just really quick build that perspective here. So like, because a revelational epistemologist is saying it's the creative act of God. That is, it's just the way that God designs human beings, and it's the revelatory acts of God. That is, it's just the way that God reveals himself to human beings. Those two things together that grounds our epistemology. I think you can look at that from the reliabilist standpoint and say, okay,
God has made your reasoning faculties reliable. The means by which it is reliable is a perfect being making it such. Right?
Exactly, which is sort of what Plantinga tries to do. I would go a little stronger than Plantinga and say that belief in God is inevitable. I don't want to agree with Plantinga on that. I want to say I think belief in God is part of the, to use your language, Frank, is part of the software of the program. So I think if we think of the human body and the human mind working together to have knowledge, it's both that our biology and our psychology and even our sociology are all built to work together already on the grounds of God's revelation, already on the grounds of an awareness of this being from whom we come. So I actually like your framework and some of what it has to offer. But I think
this framework is because I like Christian frameworks. I developed this precisely because, like, I was listening to John Frame and it's like, it's a good idea, actually. It's like, I don't agree with like the specifics, but look, like, I like the number 3. I've always liked it, and I've always liked this idea of like analyzing things. Like, you can look through all my notes. There's always like these pictures and stuff. Like, like Richard Feynman, like the Feynman diagrams. They always like doodles.
Yes, oh, those are awesome.
That's me. That's like, I don't know crap about quantum physics, but like, I just like to doodle, and I like to be able to think like languages on one side and images on the other, right? Like I talked about earlier, like you have reasoning, but you also have imagination. I say I don't really know how you would speak of imagination in terms of reliability, so I sort of fled that off. But I believe that you need both, and that part of that, the imagination part, is this sort of geometric, like you have geometry, and then you have analysis, and then and they work fine, but part of the analysis, the geometric side, is these images, and these images, the triangle is the penultimate of all images because basically everything can be thought of in terms of triangles, and so I don't know, I have all kinds of weird aesthetic issues, like yeah.
No, I totally sympathize with it. Yeah, I am in the so just to give you an example, like I'm in the habit of whenever I reply to someone, I'll have already written. I'll know what I'm, generally the kind of response I'm going to give, but when I'm writing it out, I'll say it's wrong for these 3 reasons or something like that, and then I always end up having to go back and correct myself because it was only for 2 or it was for 8 or whatever. But I always, I agree. I like the.
I'll muse, like, so what I'll do is I'll write a first response, like a rough draft, and then I'll ask questions to myself from the perspective of somebody else. So I'll be like, okay, how would this person? I'll try. It's basically part of being charitable. Like, it's part of philosophical charity. It's like the skill. Like, philosophical charity is like, first it's a disposition. Like, you just want to be charitable to people, but sometimes that's not enough. You need like a skill. There's a like, how do you be charitable? It's like, Jesus says you ought to pray, and he says, well, how do we pray? And then he gives the example. Well, it's like, okay, you ought to be charitable. Well, how? There's a skill to it. There is this art, and so you have to develop these little techniques, and one of them is, okay, rough draft, think of it from their perspective, try to imagine it making sense, and as best as you can. Like, you can't expect too much of yourself if it, cognitive dissonance and whatever, but like as best as you can, and then ask questions, and then try to answer those questions, and then ask questions about the questions, and answer questions to the questions, and ask questions about the questions, and like, you could do this ad infinitum. Like, you don't have to do it forever, but like, I call it musing, and it's because I developed, like, this, what I'm doing, the questioning thing, is actually comes from when I was trying to teach myself how to write like fiction or whatever, like I failed at it, but there was like a thing that I learned. It was called musing, and it was like you would start off with something, and then you would ask questions about it, and then you would answer the questions, and then you would ask questions about those things, and then you would answer the questions, and you would ask questions about those things, and you get a whole book eventually would come out of that. But I've applied that to philosophy and charity, and it lets me figure out how I'm wrong about people in what ways. It's very systematic, and it's amazing and stuff. So I hope that like parallels with what you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the sort of the psychological side of that, which is commanded by Jesus, there is that we're supposed to have empathy for these other people. So it's on the philosophic side, like the word would be charity. Like I want to represent you correctly, and I want to try to sort of get into your head, but also I want to care about you as a human being. From my perspective, people are made in the image of God, and so when I'm talking to someone, I need to remember, holy cow, like I'm talking to another human being that was born and has their own experiences and their own personality and all these beliefs. Like I need to I need to show utmost respect and love for other people in that. So there's this moral and psychological dimension to it. So I think that's a really good, that's a really good point you bring up.
Yeah, I take a more be the change you want to be type thing. I mean, I don't always follow it, but I don't meet my own standards sometimes, whatever. But it's more of a, if the world, I want to make, I don't like. There's like an emotional aspect to it. I just don't like being a dick, even though I eventually am, no matter what. But I don't want, there's a whole bunch of different ways I can look at it. I don't have a unified way of putting it the way you do. I probably will, after this conversation, realize that and figure out a way of putting it, and then say I wish I said that before. But right now I don't have a simple way of putting it, but like why I try to be charitable and whatnot. I blame Maximus Confesses for that, because I used to. I think I've told you about this before. Maximus Confesses showed like an issue with I was trying to create this moral system. Like I always start from intuition, right? I say, and I'm not going to go into that. We need to get back on topic.
I have led you astray. Let's see if we can. So you were talking about you were using the problems that have been developed against evolutionary reliabilism to sort of describe and explicate and make a case for it.
Yeah, like I'm effectively using the problems against themselves in a way, but so
yes,
that's basically how all development works. You look at it, it's the whole synthesis, thesis, antithesis, synthesis type thing. What was I going?
I think you were.
I have what I want to say. Like my plan is I'm just gonna read from the comment, but I want to preamble it.
Okay.
So I'm trying to figure out. I had it in mind, and then we changed. How will I preamble this? So screw it. I'm just gonna read it. Okay. So our cognitive faculties guide our behavior. What we perceive, desire, and believe, or more precisely, the brain states correlated to perception, belief, and desire, lead to what actions we take. If we perceive, desire, or believe the wrong things and act on those cognitive faculties, we'll die more often than not. If we don't desire to survive and thrive in general, and we have more particular desires which are contrary to surviving and thriving, for example, we desire not to drink water, and we act on these desires, well informed by our senses and reason/belief, will likely die and be selected out. If we believe the wrong things, due either to having perceived the wrong thing or having failed to reason well from our senses, and we act on that belief, then there are going to be more cases when false belief is deleterious than true belief. That is to say, it's not pragmatic, it's not adaptable, it's not survivable. Really, the only time unreliable belief, senses and Really, the only time unreliable senses and reasoning are adaptable is when there are perfect storms of sorts. For example, Plantinga's tiger example. But if an animal constantly has desires which, counterfactually, had they been well informed by their beliefs and senses when acting on them, they'd be dead, then would usually die. So to put that another way, if you have, so our actions are primarily motivated by our desires is the idea that I'm putting forth, and people will debate that. Like there's different systems of how our actions ultimately come about. That's where free will comes in and whatnot. But on the model I'm putting forth, the ultimate outcome of whatever action we have is the result of our desiring things. This is the Humean, the reasoning is the slave of the desires or whatever. We act because we desire to act. But if our desires themselves, it would normally, if well informed by our reasoning and senses, lead to our death, then even when they're not well informed, most of the time they're going to lead to our death. And so this is where I go. Okay. The only way for such an animal to survive, given that they have these bad desires, these deleterious desires, is if their beliefs or perceptions were usually wrong and in such a way that the actions motivated by the faulty desire would still lead to adaptable behavior. But that would require a belief-forming mechanism that could somehow predict the faulty desire an animal would have and at what times, and then formulate beliefs and or perceptions that acting on which would lead to survival. So what you have is, you have the desire, which, if it was well-informed, would lead you to die. Like, if you act on a well-informed desire, you would die. You have a desire, which, if the belief on which, so you act on beliefs because you desire something, but beliefs come from reasoning from our senses. So if at any of these stages, the belief formation, the reasoning, the senses, are something wrong, that might let us survive. But normally, if the desire is deleterious, if the desire is effectively to die, then normally you wouldn't. And the only way for that to happen is if there is something really weird going on in either the belief formation, the reasoning from the senses, or the senses themselves. But for that to happen, for that weird thing to occur, this whole system of belief formation, the senses, the reasoning, and the actual formation of belief, has to be, in some sense, be able to predict what the desire is going to be. That the desire is going to be deleterious, and then somehow make a belief, or make a delusion, or make a hallucination, effectively, which would lead to adaptable behavior. But that is a complicated process. So the problem is, there's only two ways for this to happen. The first is pure dumb luck, and luck can't be selected for us. So, yeah, you could just, luckily, perfect storm, just so happens that the belief forming mechanism, just sort of lucky for you, you believe the wrong thing at the right time. But that can't be selected for. Evolution has nothing to do with that. So that's like the lucky idiot, The second possibility is having an already well-functioning belief-forming mechanism that somehow alters the normal conclusions from the senses or reasoning in such a way that the following action, that the action which follows from acting on the belief from desires, would be survivable. But this process would be rather complicated. The belief-forming mechanism would have to somehow know what actions were survivable or not, as well as what the organism's desire is, and be advanced enough to take the form of the desire, be it intuitive or proposition, and construct a belief, again intuitive or propositional, which would inform behavior that, motivated by that desire, would still be adaptable. So again, you have the desire which normally which if it was well influenced, would lead to death. It's a maladaptive desire. It's a desire which, well informed, which if you acted on a well-informed belief-forming mechanism, it would lead to a behavior which would kill you, such as the desire.
Okay, can I jump in and ask a question here?
Go ahead.
Okay, so what is confusing me about this argument is that I'm not sure. Just from the information provided, I'm not really convinced that the mechanism needs to be that complex, or that it needs to account for luck. It seems to me there's plenty of historical examples where false beliefs led to the great survival of some nation, some society, an individual.
I'm not saying that can't happen or that it doesn't happen. I'm saying that normally you die because of it. Like as a general rule, false beliefs lead to death or lead to other negative selective procedures. Like death is natural selection, but there are other selective. Like I'll say cultural selection does something else. It doesn't lead to death, but it leads to like the dissolution of the culture or something.
Can I jump in on that real quick?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I guess the problem for me there is, okay, maybe so, but what standard are we using to measure that, right? If we're using the very standard, so if evolutionary reliabilism, if the mechanism of evolutionary reliabilism, right, if this evolution is what causes the basic change in constitution, which itself,
however reality is, if your belief maps to that, it's true, right? Just as however God's mind is, if your beliefs map to that, it's true. There is some sort of isomorphic relation between the structures of reality and the structures of your mind.
Yes, I guess I'm not questioning the truth condition just yet. I guess my problem is more about the justification, right? or the warrant, whatever placeholder you would have there.
The justification. So this is externalism. So there's a subjective and an objective justification, right? There's this subjective, what lets me say I know 2 + 2 = 4, right? Well, that is just, I take like a kind of Wittgenstein's sort of, I'm still reading his Uncertainty, but like so far his views sort of align with mine. The idea is that I use induction, deduction, and abduction. I use my senses and reasoning. I use what cognitive faculties I have. My cognitive faculties are trustworthy. Like I assume that as a basis on the subjective level. On the objective level, what the externalist justification is that I've evolved in such a way that my cognitive faculties are generally reliable. And my goal is to say that that's actually possible. So you will say that God has revealed it to you in such a way that you can know with general certainty. I say that I have evolved in that my species and my culture and I as an individual have grown and evolved in such a way that it's generally reliable. And to see if that claim is a consistent claim, I just have to show. I have to go through the specifics. I have to show how that works out ultimately, and that's the goal here. The challenge to my view is this evolutionary argument against naturalism, and there's also like certain other philosophical points.
Right, and I guess where I'm trying to challenge the view is when you say this is the mechanism which accounts for this belief system, right? This is the mechanism which accounts for my epistemology. But historically, that mechanism has been the source of many false beliefs, much unreliability in terms of epistemic concerns. The problem is, well, now anytime you go to appeal to that same mechanism, which we just agreed has historically been unreliable, how do you know that it's not unreliable in that case where you're appealing to it?
How do you know that you're not influenced by sin right now? How do you know that your conclusions aren't influenced? I have a question. The counter arguments work. So this is the thing that, again, the fact that what your argument here is generally is just how general is the reliability. That's the question effectively. Like I could say, okay.
Well, wait, real quick. If I can be more, if I can just be as specific as possible, just because I don't want to, I don't want to cause unclarity in the discussion. The problem is, and this was part of my notes that I was making about our discussion. The problem is that, on my view, there seems to be a distinction, a significant distinction, that is the kind that's relevant to epistemology, between the source and justifier of my beliefs revolving around my general epistemology, my general worldview, so on and so forth, versus the cause of error. They're not the same cause. There's a huge epistemologically significant distinction there. But in your system, that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems that the same mechanism, which is responsible for disease, responsible for insanity, responsible for false beliefs in general, to the extent even that people can survive because of those things, is also being attributed reliability. And I just see that as problematic. Like, what distinction can you make there?
You're saying that this human body, I know I'm answering with like a tit for tat. I'll try to give a positive answer as well, but I could say that you're relying on a God who allows sin to affect our nature. You're relying on a God who you're relying on like you have to trust your own cognitive faculties. You have to believe that your own cognitive faculties are reliable, but you also have to believe that your cognitive faculties are negatively affected by sin. You have this. The problem you're putting forth is effectively, my cognitive faculties aren't perfect. Evolution is not a perfect means. Okay, well, God also hasn't. Your own view says that God hasn't perfectly given you cognitive faculties because He's made you such that Adam could sin and did sin, and then Adam did sin, and there's issues like I won't go into that, but like Adam and the history of your view says that Adam did sin, and that resulted in sins having this effect on, or what was it called, the noetic effects of sin, and the noetic effects of sin explain the unreliability of cognitive faculties. So how do you know at any given time that you're not under the negative effects of noetic effects of sin? That's a good thing. The noetic effects of sin are something you want in your view. I don't want to be omniscient, right? But your issue, but like, yes, evolution historically, like the history we're appealing to, me and you appeal to the same history, right? The same history I appeal to is the same history you appeal to. If you're going to appeal to these big mistakes which led to good things, and these big mistakes, if you're going to lead to big mistakes which led to good things, and you're going to say that's God intervening somehow, the thing is they're still mistaken. It was still the noetic effects of sin there. I could say, okay, that's just good luck. That's just the fact that your view of history and my view of history are different. But it's not really. Do you see why I see this isn't an argument against it? Like the positive reason, right? So the positive reason is like the rest of my entire system. So again, this is like the generality. How generally reliable is it? So as I said, evolution on the so biological evolution is going to be very, very general. So there's this inverse relation, right? There's it's the specificity of the proposition that you're believing in, is inversely proportional to how selective. So say I believe that the Earth is orbiting, the sun is orbiting around the Earth, right? I have a geocentric theory, and that's a belief that we had in the past. The specificity of the belief that the sun is orbiting around the Earth is false. Actually, there is no truth to that matter. Motion is relative, right? According to the relativity theory. But you could say, but I could say that the heliocentric model is simpler. In truth, the sun orbits around the Earth. Or you could say, well, no, in truth, the planets are in relative. Motion is relative, right? Motion is a relative property according to relativity theory, if I understand it well enough. So there is no centric. There is no center.
Right. Space is relational, right?
Yeah.
So
the specificity of the heliocentric and the geocentric models are false, right? Those are false beliefs. Those aren't. But they are right in that they suppose some relation between the two, right? They are right. They are sort of right. They're just too specific.
Can I? Let me just see if I'm understanding you so far. So correct me if I'm wrong here. What it sounds like you're saying is, you're basically positing like a structuralism. The beliefs, these models in specifics were wrong, but all of them had an underlying structure to them that's basically true.
I don't know structuralism to know if I'm agreeing with you, but that sounds a lot like what I'm saying.
That sounds right.
I'm trying to add in evolution to that. I'm trying to show how there's a lot of.
I just want to make sure I'm not misrepresenting you. So
yeah, that sounds right. Again, I don't know. Like you're using the word structure, and I've heard the word structure before, and I've used the word structure before, but I have not read enough about structuralism to be sure if it connotes anything that I don't know. So,
for the sake of argument, I will grant you what this belief is that sounds like structuralism.
Yeah. But the idea is the more specific the belief is, the harder it is going to be for a selective power to affect it. given that I have like a mathematics. Can I? This is something I'm gonna have to take notes on later. But like,
Can I respond to the tu quoque?
sure.
Okay, so well, first of all, let me just point out that it's not necessarily just to qualify my use of that.
I know it's
phrase.
not always a fallacy. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. As long as we agree, like I'm not accusing you of a fallacy here. It could be a fallacy, but I don't think that's what you're
the
doing.
argument you're talking about. Yeah, tu quoque is only fallacious when I'm trying to say that. I actually wrote a comment about this a while back. There's very specific conditions under which tu quoque is fallacious, and I'm quite sure that my tu quoque wasn't
It's
fallacious.
not.
Yeah.
And I agree. But basically, anytime you use it to forfeit giving a positive response, that's when it's fallacious. When you just say, yeah, I'm fallacious, but so are you, that's when it's fallacious. Right.
No, I disagree. That's not the reason. It's not the point of tu quoque is that, so in this case, tu quoque would be valid even if I didn't give a positive response, because if we're trying to obduce, if we're trying to say which of our views is better, and your view has the exact same problem as my view, then on that matter, on the question of this historical view of things, because our views are equal, no matter how much we argue about it, so long as they are equal, then this cannot have any effect on either of us. You will persist in your view, and I will persist on my view. The question of like you should not deny my view because it can't account for this, precisely because your view has the same issue. So even if I don't give a positive response, it's not a problem. It was a valid tu quoque because on this abductive evaluation, we're in the same boat. Like that's how it's used. Because we're in the same boat. If we weren't in the same boat, if I was saying, if you were trying to say something more deductive, if you're trying to say, you have this, so like say we're trying to talk about, you're a person in an audience and I'm running for president, right? And you say, and I give this argument and it's question time, and the audience member says, how can you say this and this? Because you do this and you have these moral issues, and say, well, it just so happens that I, as the presidential candidate, know this audience member. It's like, well, you have these same issues. I know that you've done this with your wife or whatever, right? Well, it doesn't matter. Like the question is my presidential candidacy. Now, on the other hand, if another presidential candidate does the exact same thing, it would be fallacious because the point is character is relevant to presidential candidacy. If one president says a tu quoque to another president, they're both still in the negative. They're both sucky candidates because they both have a crappy character. It's fallacious for one to do the other because whatever, but it's not fallacious for an audience member to do it. Tu quoque is a contextual fallacy. The same is true with
Well, can I interject real quick? Because as long as we agree that I don't think you were committing the fallacious version of the tu quoque there, right? As long as we're in the same boat. We're in the same boat.
You want me to get back to the
challenge? Well, let me respond to that real quick. So the issue is if I can distinguish between our two systems, then it doesn't seem like the same boat problem applies, right? It doesn't seem like. So my objection was, just to quickly restate it, my objection was, it seems like we are attributing reliability in the epistemically significant sort of way, that we're attributing reliability to a mechanism which from the outset we've agreed is historically unreliable, at least in the epistemic significance, right? This mechanism provides for irrationality a lot throughout history. And in fact, one of the snarky remarks that I made was, hey, you should be thankful for religion because on an evolutionary view of history, human beings have been superstitious religiously, and they did that for the sake of their own survival for thousands of years. And that's the only reason we're here. But the difference between that and my view is, yes, on my view, God is sovereign over all things. God controls and determines all things. But the placeholder for mechanism there, right? The sources of rationality and the sources of false beliefs, or the grounds of rationality and the causal mechanism for false beliefs are not the same. On the one hand, you have divine revelation, and on the other hand, you have the accidental sin property, which is inherited from Adam, and they're not the same place. So that anytime I have knowledge, it's always going to be in confrontation with God's revelation. But anytime I don't have knowledge, it's always going to be because of the noetic effects of sin, right? And those are two different, quote unquote, causal players in this paradigm. But on your view, I don't see that kind of distinction between.
My knowledge, as I told you, it's about my truth, my theory of truth. It's I know something given the proposition I believe, or the intuition that I have corresponds with reality in some sense. That correspondence is a kind of isomorphism, and the isomorphism admits of degrees, just as the reliability admits of degrees. We both agree with this, right? Reliability admits of degrees. We both agree about the characterization of history, right? Historically, both of the cognitive faculties which we share, which we agree we share, at least tentatively, until such a time as you show that I can't account for anything. But
No, I agree that's part of my worldview, that we're both human beings.
Yeah.
My perspective is that we're made in the image of God. Yours isn't, but I still think we share the same cognitive faculty.
The image of God doesn't get you anywhere because you still have the noetic effects of sin. What you're saying is that knowledge is knowledge of God, but that's just your theory of truth. You're really just bringing your theory of truth back. Well, then my theory of truth is just as good. It's
Frank,
all you're doing, as far as I can tell. I mean, maybe.
Let me see if I can't be more clear. Again, it's not the truth condition that I'm bringing up here. It's the justification condition, or the warrant for that. In my case, justification for beliefs comes from comportation to God's revelation. And whenever we have a false belief, we know that it's because of the noetic effects of sin, right? Because my basic human faculties have been veiled or distorted, or to some degree undermined by the property of sin. That's what accounts for my false beliefs. But the justifications there are different. And in any case where I have a false belief, my justification isn't going to comport to God's revelation. But in your case, it seems to be the justification for your most basic worldview is grounded in the same causal mechanism. There's no distinction in that mechanism between what's causing false beliefs and what's causing true beliefs. It's the same for both.
Yeah, but why is that significant? That sounds like your view is unnecessarily. That sounds like it's in favor of my view. It sounds like your view has a problem with Occam's razor. It doesn't sound like my view has a. You still have to. We still have the same problem. All you're saying is that the conditions of reliability. So either you're going to your truth. Okay, unless I'm misunderstanding you, like maybe I'm missing some nuance. But either you're talking about your theory of truth, which again I sort of like we're fine, or you're talking about the conditions under which something is reliable, and something can only be reliable in your view, given that it comports with that it comes from revelation, that God has the Holy Spirit's working through you, as opposed to the sinful secondary causes or whatever.
And really quick, methodologically speaking, just to give like a practical perspective on the matter, when I'm having beliefs, so long as they comport to the worldview that I'm getting from exegesis of the Bible, which is God's revelation, I'm safeguarded, right? Now, I'm not saying I perfectly exegete, or that I perfectly do this or that, but at the basis, my worldview does not depend on my cognitive faculties. It's grounded in God's act, so that what I know, or what I'm justified in believing with, starts from an infallible source, which then can move on to beliefs which can be true or false based on interaction with sin. But for your point of view, the starting point of your epistemology is the same, or it's grounded in the same mechanism.
Reality can't be wrong because it's reality, and everything comes from reality, right? I know I'm interpreting it as like a truth thing, but It's you have this. You say I have an infallible source. Well, so do I. It's reality. What how can reality be wrong? It's reality. It's what's real. I guess the word truth. It's the extension of the word truth is reality. Reality and truth are coextensional. They're transcendental terms.
Right.
So
Right. But I think I would agree with that. I think I would agree with that. But I think both of us can conceive or our conceptions of reality, they're a little bit different, right? When I say reality is infallible, what I'm saying is, okay, reality is a word that refers to God and his creation and how he interacts with it and how creation has all these has all this historical events in relation to God's plan. But when you say reality, at least as it relates to epistemology, what you're saying is, biology includes this evolutionary factor, and this evolutionary factor acts as a mechanism for our beliefs and behavior, and in different ways. There's a biological factor, there's a psychological factor, there's a sociological factor, but all of those interact as constituents of rationality. And what I'm pointing at is, well, from the perspective of what I think the word reality is referring to, there's a distinction between what grounds beliefs that I believe are infallible and how I can move on from those beliefs and still be wrong about things, namely sin. But for you, the same thing, the same mechanism that is grounding what needs to be infallible, what needs to be your basis for knowledge, is also the same thing that's grounding irrational beliefs.
So you need a different you need a different mechanism. Why should the point is the mechanism, right? It's not the actual belief. It's not whether or not the belief corresponds with whatever you believe, whatever however that works. The point is the means by which you obtain the beliefs, the belief forming mechanism. As I talked about, that's my way of putting it.
Yes. So if I could put this in the simplest way possible, my system seems to include a starting point that is absolutely reliable, and when I move on from there, problems can occur. But at least my starting point, at least the point of starting, has no problem with it. Whereas on your system,
you're talking about like original innocence. Is that the starting point? It's like a historic.
No, my starting. No.
You're born.
My starting point.
You're born with sin. Your cognitive faculties start off affected by the noetic effects. So your starting point's the same.
Yes. Well, no, because but I'm not attributing. The difference is I'm not attributing my cognitive faculties or the mechanism or the biological mechanisms behind them with grounding my starting point for knowledge, for grounding my ultimate epistemology. My epistemology starts with the fact that God reveals himself and creates human beings in such a way that they, to use metaphorical language, that we are hardware that runs on the software of his revelation. And now, of course, if there's no, I think you need to, part of the difference between us also is that from my point of view, there is a salvific element. There's a problem of, well, yeah, people are going to be, sin is going to affect people more and more the more they're apart from Jesus, right? Jesus is sort of the way out, if you will, from the intellectual prison of sin. So yes, there's definitely that point where you have to repent and believe in Jesus, recant idolatrous worldview, and accept what Jesus has to say about us, and accept what he's done on the cross to get us out of this problem. That is an element maybe I haven't described clearly enough. But as far as knowledge is concerned, where we're working with true justified belief or true warranted belief or whatever you want to say, I think every human being has that as a result of God's revelation and as a result of God's creation. And where they have false beliefs, that's not from the same causal source. That's not from
natural revelation. Do you believe that nature is a form of revelation?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Why? So it seems that all of our views agree when it comes to nature, right? Because we're both getting our sources from nature, and we're both saying that our views have to agree with nature. The point where we depart is where you are committed in your worldview, and to the claim that the Bible is a source. And by virtue of that, I would say objectively, that's an unnecessary commitment. That's extra. And I don't see how we both agree that nature, that the empirical world, like the world that we see, gives us knowledge. We both agree that internally we're imperfect at obtaining the information from the world. We have different explanations as to why.
Really quick. That is the difference, though, right? See, for me, I don't think natural revelation depends on any activity or interpretation from my part to get truth about God from it, right? It's involuntary, right? So that may be a distinction between both of us. I don't think that. I think someone can take that. I think the problem with sin,
sensation is voluntary, but cognition is in a sense voluntary. Like when I can have the information in my head, whether or not I choose to believe it is a matter of whether or not I say, okay, I believe this is true, or not. So I have this, I have the manifold of sensory experience. I have the the manifold of intuition, or however you can't call it. I am watching this video. Information is entering in my mind, and I have this this theory in the back of my mind, my worldview, theory-laden observation and whatnot, with which to make sense of this. The stuff comes untheorized. The sensation has no theory-ladenness to it, but due to my upbringing, due to my education, certain things are more salient than other things. I focus on certain things. I fail to focus on other things. I become myopic. I told you, I become myopically focused on some things, and other things become fuzzy. And different theories will let me focus on different things at different times with different levels of usefulness.
real quick, but I guess
sensation comes uninterpreted. The theory is that by which I interpret it. Go ahead.
Okay, so that's a fine distinction. I guess where I'm seeing the difference is, for me, on my worldview, I don't believe that sin can inhibit God's revelatory acts. So even God's revelation in nature is not something, it's something that can be distorted by sin. We can take it, and like you said, choose not to believe it, choose to twist it, we can misinterpret it after the fact, but we can never lose it. It's not something that dissipates from my mind. It's knowledge implanted in me, and it's knowledge given to me through natural revelation. There's nothing I can do about that, right? Which is why I said it's involuntary, right? There's nothing I can do about that knowledge. It is there. It's both a basic component to me in God's creation of me, and it's something that's constantly reinvigorated by my experiences in reality. And my sin nature can never take that away. Again, I can look back at it, and I can fool myself about it, right? Which is I think that's the problem of sin, right? The problem of sin is, God has created the world, and we look at it and we don't obey Him. We don't take care of our responsibilities, and that occurs even on an epistemic level. We have this knowledge that God has given us. We're responsible to act in comportation to that knowledge, but we don't. Does that any of that maybe answer some of this?
I'm taking notes while you're saying it. Like, it's new, right? So I gotta process it a bit.
Yeah, that's fine.
Don't you?
And oh, sorry. Well, I just wanted to apologize for not being clear earlier. Again, there doesn't on you're right that your worldview seems to be, in a sense, simpler, and that my worldview has all these has the distinction.
Simplicity between... it's not the penultimate of abductive criterion, right? Simplicity is only good given that it's accounting for everything. If your worldview accounts for more, then it's okay for it to be more complex, right? My question is whether or not there's actually anything more that your worldview is accounting for. So simplicity is only, there's like sort of this inversion here. So if two views account for the same amount of stuff, but one view assumes more things, we should not believe in the view that assumes more things. However, if two views account for different amounts of stuff, well, and this view accounts for more than this view, but it accounts for the same amount of stuff, right? So it's not like they account for two entirely different things. This view accounts for more than this view. Well, naturally, by virtue of accounting for more, it might need more. It has to suppose more things exist to account for them. But that doesn't mean I should get rid of this view. No, it accounts for more things. Now, how you determine whether or not something accounts for more things has to do with, falsification, verification, a whole bunch of other criteria, explanatory power, predictive power, those types of things. But being complex isn't the greatest sin of a worldview. It's being complex without good reason.
Yeah, I think I could agree to that, but I guess the challenge that I want to make is a little bit stronger, right? Like, it's maybe just to, I know I'm ranty and I apologize, but
No, I do the same thing.
okay, I appreciate all the discussion. So maybe if I jump back really quick to a point, and I don't have it in front of me here, but I'm pretty sure this was in our discussion somewhere. So feel free to take notes on it. What I said there, I'm pretty sure. Hopefully, sin will not affect me, and I won't contradict myself. But yeah. So there's this principle of autonomy that I think causes an antithesis at our most basic commitments. I think both of us have worldviews where we try to explain how two human beings can come together and, to use your language, have commensurable worldviews, right? On your position, our basic beliefs are pretty commensurable because we're both evolutionary creatures. And I would say, yeah, I think prima facie, if I'm running your worldview, we can come together and we can talk about these things. And just at first glance, there's a route for us to come to agreement, right? You can appeal to my desires. You can try to show me how these things work, so on and so forth.
Yeah,
for my worldview,
I can use the Socratic method.
Yes, exactly. And for me, it's very similar. The key difference being, I have grounded our I have grounded our connection in the creative acts of God, so that, again, being made in His image, we are fundamentally designed to mimic God's rationality. We have this ability, but it's tainted by sin. And so the conversations that I have with you, Frank, and with other people, there isn't common ground in the sense that there are fundamental worldview commitments that we share. There are conceptions that we share, but I think it's by an accidental result of the fact that we are both human beings made in the image of God who are working with a world that is made by God. So there's sort of this inescapability factor. We can't really escape using content that God has put out there, right? One analogy that I use a lot for the state that we are in before we come to repentance, before we put our faith in Jesus Christ, is that we're kind of committing the ultimate act of copyright infringement. Here we have all of these concepts that God has given us. Here we have this biology that God has provided for us, so on and so forth. But we're using it against the author of all this content, and we're using it without giving what's it called in legal terms? We're not citing the author, right? We're not giving attribution to the author. So, and it's the same way for epistemology, right? Here we have these minds that we constantly rely on. Here we have this air that we breathe, this biology that is constantly keeping us fed or helping us survive, so on and so forth. But we're not giving credit to the one who made it, and we're using it under the pretense that it's something else besides God that accounts for these things. And so there's this correlation between the general evangelism of Christianity, which says, look, we're sinners, we need to repent because Christ is the only way to save us from our sin, and the epistemological side, which is, look, sin causes all of this irrationality, and to escape all of this irrationality, we need to recant these idolatrous worldviews. We need to recant these idolatrous systems of epistemology and accept the revelation of God, which preeminently is shown in Christ. What Christ teaches is the culmination of everything that God has to say, and it is a message that saves people.
I can sort of.
I apologize. I'm sorry. Yeah, I apologize. I'm not trying to snowball you here. That's a lot of information to.
The beginning part I didn't take enough notes on, but like the ending bit. What I would respond to is, surely if there is a creator, right, and all that I have is attributable to him, I owe him some sort of thanks, right? That sounds to like, I mean, assuming problem of evil is resolved, right? There's certain things where I could say, well, this isn't really worthy of thanks. It's a, if somebody punches me in the face and says, why aren't you thanking me for that? It's because it's not worthy of thanks, right? Now, if the problem,
let me appeal. Let me appeal to your aesthetic too, really quick. It's not just that we're created with this duty, but originally we are quote unquote manufactured to be beings of love, right? The reason Proverbs says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. What that means in modern terms is the adoration of God is the beginning of knowledge, right? We're in this state where we are.
The Catholic Encyclopedia. It actually says that. Not the Catholic Encyclopedia. I was reading Catechism of the Catholic Church, and it actually mentions something very similar to that. But
fascinating.
I can't remember where.
Just to appeal to the aesthetic side of these things, like it's not just it is true we're created to be obligatory beings, but it's also the case that in the garden originally we were so in love with God that the concept of sinning is not something we would even consider for 2 seconds, right? It's a romantic
Jesus says
conception.
So on the one side Jesus says take up your cross, on the other says my yoke is light, right? So it's the reason that you have to take up a cross is because you have to fight the effects of sin. The reason the burden is light is because in our true nature, it wouldn't be problematic for us by our actual design, but because the nature that we see is flawed.
Yes. Which true design is being recapitulated, as it were, in us by the Holy Spirit, right? The Holy Spirit comes to us and regenerates us when we repent. And we're to quote Ephesians, we're being created for good works in Christ Jesus.
So how I would respond to that is that, again, if there is a God and the problem of evil is resolved, like, because that prevents me from saying I ought to give thanks. But given the problem of evil is resolved, if there is this good, loving Father of a God, then I would like to give thanks to him in the same way that I would give thanks to my real father, my biological father, the way I would give thanks to a friend. I mean, I might not do it all the time because I might not think to do it all the time, but whenever I think to do it, I would do it, and I would think to do it often, right? So because it would be appropriate, because it's like oh, look at all this great stuff, right? All the goods in the world, it comes from God's hand, and therefore I'm sure there's like a nice quote in the Bible somewhere I can use. But the idea is, if I don't know that the verse I'm quoting came from God, if I don't remember where I read, like if I'm reading a book and I'm quoting something, if I'm talking to you right now and I'm quoting some philosopher, I might not even realize it because I don't remember them. Now, my not remembering it may be said that I'm liable for it, right? Because I should remember it. I should remember things that I'm quoting. But there is a like, well, I didn't. I can't deal with that. And yet, even though I don't remember it, the quote still makes sense to me. I can still use the quote. I can still use the presupposition that my cognitive faculties are reliable, and I don't need God for that. So I find myself in the state. Yes, perhaps I have entered into a state of self-deception. But the thing is, even within that state, I don't need God to make sense of the world in an epistemic sense. Now, maybe in an ontological sense, maybe in the sense that, well, reality is such that God actually exists, and he is the reason you're capable of doing this stuff. But from an epistemic perspective, from my own subjective perspective, I don't. The world makes perfect sense without bringing in a God, and it makes sense. And like that's the defense I'm trying to make. And I can just presuppose my cognitive faculty is reliable, and I can say because evolution or some such, right? And that's what I'm intending to do. Now maybe it turns out that I can't do that, but that so far that doesn't seem to be a problem, if that makes sense. So this is more of an objection to presuppositionalism than Christianity in general. Again, I like Maximus Confesses' method. I like the cumulative case because I think abductively. So like again, maybe it'll turn out, maybe in my process of reasoning, it'll turn out that really I did deceive myself at some point in the past. Really, and like I know how I became an atheist, so there's like I can imagine how that might happen. But the point is, a godless universe makes sense. It's not. The model that I am using is consistent enough to let me do all the things that I need to do, right? It's consistent enough to let me think rationally. It's consistent enough to let me account for things. It's it has explanatory power. It has all these things, and that's my. Does that make sense? Is that like does this idea that I forgot the quote make sense? Like you're saying that I need to attribute it to the author, and I said, well, I forgot who the author was. I forgot. I don't even notice that I'm quoting.
Yeah, I think I follow you on that one. I guess, yeah, I think I follow you on that, and I guess what I would say is I totally respect that. I totally respect your right to believe that, but I guess what I would challenge you on is I think that's precisely the problem. Is we have these, when we're born into the world in sin, we have this second order belief in our own autonomy. We have this second order belief that we can do these things without God, that we can make sense of the universe without appealing to His word. And the problem is the whole time our first order beliefs, or in other words, the beliefs we have, which we're not being self-conscious of, at least affirmatively, but which are founding the basis of our autonomy, all the while we're attributing to autonomy our basis for living and breathing and so on and so forth, is the revelation of God. So it's this sort of, I go over to my neighbor and I borrow his tractor, and when somebody, and I'm mowing my lawn and somebody comes over and compliments, how well I did my lawn, and I say, oh yeah, I have this tractor that I came up with and it's really awesome, when really the whole time it's, no, you went to the garage and you stole your neighbor's tractor. And even though I know in my heart of hearts that I'm not telling the truth there, I have deceived myself. Like I actually do. The problem is so difficult because it's no biblical, or excuse me, no Calvinist who's being biblical will say, oh, you're just lying. No, the problem is that, yes, okay, in a very trivial sense the person is lying, but the problem is so complicated that the person actually believes, like they wholeheartedly believe, as much as they exist, as much as the stuff is going around them, that they can do these things without God, right? And that's why my position is so difficult to defend, why it's so intuitive, and
The presuppositional position commits you to claiming that there can be no alternative to your view. If you took on something like Maximus Confesses, if you took on the cumulative case, you wouldn't have that problem. You could say you are deceiving yourself, but your deception makes sense. It's a good deception. The world could be that way. It just so happens that to truly make sense of the whole world, you need Christianity or something like that. And at that point, you can stop deceiving yourself once you have been abductively convinced. The presuppositional method, on the other hand, requires you to sort of throw it in my face. Oh, you can't make sense of these things. You say you do, but you can't. But the thing is, all that's going to do is piss me off and make me go read some more stuff. It's going to make me. It's not going to make me. It is going to make me think about these things, right? But it's going to make me think about these things in such a way that I don't want to talk with you anymore. I'll talk with other people. So, like, Bonson will say your goal is to shut people up, and like I'm assuming that he means so that they can think about things, right? And Sci-10 is taking that the wrong way.
But Sci is completely misunderstood. That's really quick. That's actually a quote of Calvin, and what Calvin was saying was not what Sci-10 thinks it means, which is, I make you look like an idiot, and you go off silently pouting because I've made you look like an idiot. That is not what the Bible commands us to do, and that's not what Calvin was saying. What Calvin was saying was, we respond in such a way to the doubters of this worldview that they can't come up with a response, right?
Yeah.
It's more a case of, hey, think about these things. I want to challenge you in these things. Because I've admitted from the outset, hey, I fully admit the Bible is more convincing to me. I'm an imperfect human being. I have no ability to persuade you in and of myself. If the Holy Spirit, my arguments and stuff, that's awesome. I hope He does. but in the meantime, I'll buy you a cup of coffee and we'll go down and just be friends and whatever. But it has nothing to do with trying to make somebody else look like an idiot and go away pouting. I find that interpretation totally unbiblical.
I like that idea. I don't really know whether or not something is biblical because I'm an atheist, but whatever.
Yeah, well, we would probably agree that it's
a nicer interpretation. I like Calvin more than I like Side So yeah, I agree that the thing is, I don't think Calvin's point is a uniquely Christian point. I think it's a uniquely Socratic point. I believe that that's what Socrates was talking about. That's not eudaimonia. It's one of Socrates' goals of discourse. Parapraxis, or it's one of those Greek words, right? Eudoxis, or
yeah, I know what you're talking about, but the word is not coming to me.
That's not a Christian idea, is what I'm trying to say. It's not a uniquely Christian idea. That's an idea that I, as an atheist, can agree with perfectly. It's because it's an idea that didn't originate in Christianity. It originated in Socrates. The idea was that he's trying to, in a sense, shut people up. And like there's a lot of, like, even Socrates's, they said he was corrupting the youth, and Socrates in the Apology mentions how some of the people who took on his idea misused it. Right? They found it for fun or something like that. But I think, or maybe it was not in the Apology, but it's one of the three. Apology, and the other two afterwards. The whole death of Socrates thing. That's a Socratic point. Like that is the point of the Socratic method, is essentially to converse with people until such a time as you agree, or you reach a point where no one can say anything, right? And you guys gotta go learn more, or you find that you're never going to disagree with each other, and then you know that you can kill that person. Like you know that they will never agree with you, and so you are now justified in killing them. You've met all discursive goals. You've attempted to convert, and convert, silence, or kill. Right? I mean, killing is a type of silencing, right? What is you want to convert the person or kill the conversation? But
See, I don't.
That idea. But go ahead.
See, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I do though. Just maybe I do, but maybe I'm misunderstanding it. But just for the sake of, I want to be able to have relationships with people where my lifestyle is the apologetic. So it's not just my words that should be winsome and persuasive, but it should also be my actions that speak, to the support of this world. If I can't live to this faith, then why should anyone take me seriously? There's no reason to take me seriously if my lifestyle isn't in line with this. And to the constant almost reinterpretation, I use quotation marks here, but to the almost reinterpretation of 1 Peter 3:15, that phrase about defending the faith comes in the context of living shamelessly, in the context of saying, guys, have brotherly love for each other, work out these things with humility, right? It comes in the context of live life with such love that people will be convinced by that, right? And there's this one tiny little footnote about apologetics, and all of the apologists just kind of missed the context. And the reason, maybe I'm being too general there and making a sweeping generalization. I don't want to do that, but I know I myself have been very sinful at times in my life for missing the lifestyle of Jesus just for the sake of being an apologist, like I think Jesus was. And that's that is just to miss the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of what I think biblical Christianity is all about.
Well, I mean, this is a problem that any ethics has. Like, I mean, I agree with so much, but yes, if I want to convince somebody of the problem with my view is that it doesn't have an apologetic push. I have no desire to I have no inherent desire to convince you of things in the sense that of this entire worldview is suggesting that I ought to do this. I don't have this Jesus giving the great sending out or whatever it's called, like, you know, go and bless all the nations in the name of the Father and what you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, the Great Commission, yeah.
My worldview doesn't have that, right? I have no big push to go and convert people, but I have, again, be the change you want to be in the world. That's my equivalent. I don't have a evangelical need in my view, whereas your view does. I have a I don't have any evangelical obligation. I might be able to like I think that is like, because in my view I don't think that I necessarily, like, I don't know. I mean,
No,
I agree with
I
what you
follow
said.
you. Yeah. In other words,
And I agree with it, like, on an ethical level, but I don't have the kind of, on a motivational level. I you know, I don't have that sort of spiritual oomph. So I agree that yes, you should, a good way to persuade people is to behave in this and this way, and that it's an ethical way of persuading people, and that you know this is just part of ethos, pathos, and logos. You know, that's just the ethos part, right? You have to have a good ethos, you have to have a good ethic, and people are persuaded by ethic just as much as they're persuaded by good reasoning, just as much as they're persuaded by an emotional appeal put in the right way. And you should do your reasoning and your emotional appeals ethically. So like the pathos I attempt to provide is a slightly comedic but ultimately calm and rational view. That's like how I talk. I try to, you know that I'm willing to take a few punches, but as long, you know, but I also, like, I'll become serious sometimes. That is my pathos. And I'll become serious when I think you're, you know, I'll talk about, like, there's no, when I'm speaking with certain types of presuppositionalists, and I'll say there's no conversation to be had if you do this. Like, you'll hear me say this over and over again. If you do X, Y, and Z, then there is no conversation to be had. I'm sort of like warning you that I might not continue talking with you if you keep going this route. You haven't done that yet, right? I mean, I don't always use it as a warning. Sometimes, like, there's philosophical, that phrase is also used. I also use it for completely innocent reasons, but I'm going off subject. The idea is that I agree that there's this ethos point. There's this. It's not merely words. You have to have a life of sorts, and I suppose my view is lacking there. I don't know. I have no life. I'll say it all the time.
That's why we get to be philosophy junkies, right? So, real quick, I really need to step away for just a second. Do you want to open up the room at this point? And
Sure.
maybe, cool. Okay, I will share the link. And then, like I said, I'll step away and be away for maybe like 30 seconds, but I will be right back. Let's see here. Give me 1 second. Google Plus is on a 6-year-old computer. It is really slow.
I think I'm watching, so it says 3 people watching, but I'm pretty sure that's including me. So I don't know if you're watching as well. So we might have one person.
I have not been. But I think there's 1 or 2 people.
We have 2 people, including myself. Or no, we have 3 people, including myself.
This, and I will.
Has there been anything in the chat?
I didn't see anything. I stopped by for a second earlier, and I didn't see anything. But I'm also not sure if that loads.
No, it's there. I'll type something now.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Unfortunately, we didn't get a lot of traction here.
But that's cool. People will come back and watch it later. I want to start doing. I really like Bert's method of creating little inserts or excerpts, whatever that is. My language is confused, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
You're talking about like I don't know what you're talking about.
Are
you talking about when he does a hangout on like a philosophical text or something?
No. What I mean is where he takes like little, he'll take little divisions of the entire argument where we were talking about a specific topic, just to kind of give kind of an overview. You know, basically, if our conversation was written out, he quotes a certain passage in video, right? He puts up a video, a little snippet. That's the word I'm looking for. He uploads snippets of the conversation.
Oh yeah, like when he makes comments. Like, are you talking about in Hangouts or in like a as his actual videos.
As his actual videos.
You know what I'm talking about, like the difference between like the Hangouts and the 7-minute or so video. You know?
Yeah. So he'll have a hangout that's live, and it'll be like 3 hours long, and then he'll come back
And comment on.
Well, but he'll download the video and then upload little snippets of that 3-hour session as a new video, just to give you kind of like a little.
Okay, yeah, I get that.
Yeah. And I really like that method. I think it's very useful. I want to copy him, and I think it's a good idea.
I don't have.
As long as
I'm using like a Google Acer laptop thing, so I can do that. But
oh, nice. I need to get. Well, I have a 6-year-old computer, so I need to get a new one.
I had a much older than 6-year-old computer, which I stopped using. It's dead. It died. It exploded. Well, it didn't explode. You can go and do what? Did you put the thing in the? Did you put the live whatever in?
I put it in. I put it as a comment on my share before, and now I'm going to put it as a new thread, just so people can see it on the feed.
If I start doing Hangouts, I'll probably just do my stuff. Like I like what MK's doing. Like he'll do a couple of, I think it's MK. He'll upload a video where he just sort of gives his thoughts, and I think that's a good idea because I would do it for the sake of getting criticism though. Like that's what I've been doing in my. Like I might like read something from this and then like the catechism or something. Like it might be a good motivation for me to learn more about stuff. Like that's my problem. I learn more discursively. I learn more through the Socratic method than I do through just reading crap. So I have a tendency never to finish. Like I'll start a philosophical work and then just never finish it because I get bored with it. So
That's
like
that is totally fair.
I can like predict what they're going to say, and it's like, or it's
Yeah.
it's not always that. Like sometimes it's like, again like I'll go back to it, and it's like, oh, I didn't think they were going to say that, but it's like.
let me step away for really quick. I'll be right back.
I'll just tweet on you.
Okay, sorry. I'll have to edit that out of the video later. When you drink as much coffee as I do, man, you got to visit the bathroom a lot. So yeah, okay. But maybe so I gotta take off soon. We've been on here for a couple of hours now, but if that's okay with you.
Oh, that's fine. No, I was thinking really to the couple of hours. Like I didn't.
Sweet.
Was
Okay,
kinda...
so maybe. Sorry. Yeah, maybe we can just hit. Maybe we can hit some of the original topics really quick, just as sort of a.
You want to go? Me too. It's not going to be really quick if I can.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. Well, I only. I
Like
really.
Go ahead.
If somebody doesn't come in, I would really like to leave in 15 minutes because that will mean I spent 2.5 hours.
Then you can end, right? If not, like maybe you can like give me the mods or something. I don't really know how to use mods, so never mind. If someone doesn't come in the next
Oh, that's right. I forgot. I can give you mods. Yeah. So I will end.
Don't give them to me. I'll explode something.
I trust you. You want to explain?
Spontaneously combust. What does this button do?
Nice.
The whole internet breaks.
The whole internet, the internet just collapses on itself.
Accidentally divided by 0. I don't know how that happened. I took the red pill and the blue pill.
The red pill and the green pill. Okay, let me see if I can't challenge this perspective from. So, the challenge that we were talking about earlier is really the second objection that I have, which is the incoherence objection. Right? I'm arguing that this view, because I believe it attributes to the same mechanism, rationality and irrationality, ends up being unable to distinguish between the two, and we would just be lost in rationality. But the other, there's two other objections that I gave, and maybe we can move to the first one. That was the second, but the first one I gave was the subjectivism problem, which is how on this position, right? So that's more of the second objection is more about is really a classic reductio. I'm just attempting at least to take your commitments and demonstrate that they don't work, that they come out incoherent. But the first objection was, I think, more general. It's just a question of why believe that the evolutionary mechanism provides general reliability. Why not believe that it's just luck or something, or that we should remain agnostic about the matter or something like that, right? What reason can be provided consistent with your system? I'm not asking for. I'm not trying to make an external critique, but what answer can you give as to why someone should believe this view, assuming that that's actually what's going on in the background?
Yeah, and that's where the majority of my answer is. That's like do you want me to answer that? Like, do you want me to continue? Like, I give you the reason. The reason is because, without preempting things, we evolve in such a way that our cognitive faculty, evolution selects for reliable belief-forming mechanisms, generally reliable belief-forming mechanisms. And so long as the beliefs are vague enough, so it's not merely beliefs. So that belief, I say, can take two forms. It can be the propositional attitude, or it can be kind of a pre-linguistic intuition. So after language comes in, different stuff happens. Language adds in some stuff. But prior to language, you just have sort of these intuitions. You have this kind of, this sort of feeling act this way. I mean, like, I'm using language to articulate the feeling, but it wouldn't be linguistic. It would be like, it would be, ooh, yeah, like it would.
Yes.
But it would be this intuition, which is not nearly, it would be like a reason of sorts. It would be a kind of reason, but it would be a pre-linguistic reason. The same reason that a dog has, right? Like, Aristotle talks about the dog who sniffs this way, sniffs that way, and realizes that the scent isn't in the 2 or 3 directions, so he moves in the 3rd direction. So there's a kind of pre-linguistic reasoning that it's not really right to call it reason, because reason is linguistic, as I see it, but it's an intuition. And so as long as the intuition isn't too specific, as long as it's general enough, it will be selected for. Or rather, the system which produces the intuition will be selected for. Same thing with after language. The system which produces general enough, like it's reliable up to a point. It's reliable so long as the propositions are general enough. It's reliable. So again, like, so you have the issue with the Earth, geocentrism versus heliocentrism. They're both wrong, but they're right in a general sense that there is some relation that the planets, that these two cosmological bodies have. There is some relation. It's just that they get the specifics wrong, but they're generally right. And so the more general you get, the easier it is for the cognitive faculty to produce that, and the easier it is for the evolution to select for the cognitive faculty. But and that's just biological evolution. Cultural evolution is memetics. It's not merely if you believe the wrong thing you die. Well, there's other reasons why you don't want to believe the wrong thing. So cultural selection, if you believe the wrong thing, you don't produce enough crops and you have to pay more taxes. If you believe the wrong thing, if you don't produce enough food, you go really hungry for a particular winter. You don't die, but it sucked, and other people were better, and because they were better, they built. The emperor gave them better stuff or whatever, right? Like there's reward mechanisms. There's other ways for things to be selected for. And because certain things are selected for, like for example, this particular bit of agriculture, well, that gets handed on. The higher levels of governing systems have a reason to preserve those beliefs. So the chief remembers this is the best way to weave the fence, and other ways of weaving the fences are bad because they don't give out. So you have some people you'll have like these tribes will weave fences in this way, and that tribe will weave fences in a different way. Certain fence weaves are selected for because they're useful, and there's
Can I cite your you use an argument of this sort in your comment? Is it okay if I had a response here, and I still have the citation? Is it okay if I quote you here?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the comments, and again, it's for anybody who's watching, it's on. I shared it on the link where I actually shared this Hangout, but or not this Hangout, but the YouTube view of this Hangout. But this is the citation. It says, for any society to function, no matter how primitive, it has to be able to communicate reliably, otherwise it would fall apart. Societies which don't advance quickly enough in sciences of military, agriculture, economics, etc., often are taken down by other societies, or fall apart from within due to their own weight and need.
Or is they either taken down by other societies, or they fall apart from their own weight. Like they fall apart from within because they fail to meet their own needs.
Right, and no doubt that part I agreed with that part, but then this was your inference. You said, thus, my language is trustworthy in the broadest sense. Thus, I can assume that my language and beliefs are slightly more trustworthy on these various topics. And I think the line of reasoning there was, look, these things are indispensable to society, and I'm part of this society, so I have a grounds for general reliability of my rationality, of my linguistics.
At that point, it's specifically language. The general reliability of my cognitive faculties has been established by biological evolution. But the cognitive faculties are more than just these sort of intuitive thingies. There's also language. So I say, well, why should I trust my language? Why should I think that my language is comporting with reality? Why should I say that, 2 plus 2 equals 4 can map onto anything? Why should that be the case? Well, yes, it was selected for, because for something to survive, it has to, for a social or animal to survive, it has to communicate. And the larger the society, the more precise the communication is needed. Otherwise, big mistakes happen. So you need to be able to say not just, but like Wittgenstein would talk about this again, right? The certain language games that need to be played for a society. So like Wittgenstein doesn't talk about it in terms of, I don't know if he talks about it in terms of evolution, but he says, you have the brick building language game, right? The this is brick. Like you make the sound brick, and it symbolizes something, and it means do some action. So I say brick, and my friend takes the brick and gives it to me, and I put it here, and I say log or pillar, and he says, oh, he takes the pillar and put it over here, and so I make a house, right? And that lets me survive, whatever. If I couldn't communicate effectively on this most basic and primitive level, I said brick and he punched me in the face, that stuff would happen. If I said log and he murdered my children for some reason, right, there'd be a problem. Miscommunications will kill us, both on all levels of society. So on the higher levels of society, when society is much bigger, and you say, oh, bring this amount of wheat to this area, and there's a miscommunication, bad stuff happens. So emperor.
Right.
So the thing is,
right.
Along with a whole bunch of other stuff, like you need good, along with like having good means of transportation and stuff. There's a whole bunch of other things that are needed. But at the very least, you need a precise vocabulary. So basically, the general level is the grammar. My grammar is reliable, and it signifies, and the vocabulary, the lexicon,
Could I?
something, some vague thing.
Sure. Would you?
And I can trust that because of social selection. But more precise things, so for example, this or that scientific theory, well, that's too precise. I might not be able to trust that because the scientific theory is too precise. But the reason I trust the scientific theory is where I didn't really write that in the comments. The reason I trust this or that scientific theory is because it's explanatory power, because it shows itself to be useful in the same way that like language is useful for surviving on the broadest sense. It's useful for, not getting punished by the emperor or not getting punished by the environment, even if it's not, selected. Even if it's not like a natural selection, but it's still some kind of punishment is going on. To avoid that punishment and to obtain some reward, you need good means of obtaining reward and good means of avoiding punishment, and communication is fundamental for a social animal. Precise communication, some communication has to be useful. So my language has to be in some general sense useful. It has to, exactly how, I'm not entirely sure yet. Like that comes later, but it has to be able to let me communicate with you in some way. There has to be, on some level, me and you have to be understanding each other.
Or you wouldn't survive, right?
What?
Or you wouldn't survive, right?
Yeah. Well, no, it's not merely survival. The natural selection is survival. Like, it's not just surviving. It's also,
thriving.
So it's not like I wouldn't survive. The society wouldn't survive. So I could persist, right? I could
But real quick.
Misunderstand you, and I could kill you, and if I'm an individual in society, and there's like 5 men in my tribe, and we're trying to communicate with each other, and we have this much meat, and we're trying to distribute the meat. Well, I can kill everyone else and take the meat and get away. Right? Society dies, but I survive.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But also, society doesn't need each of its individual members to operate according to that system for the society to survive either, right?
Yeah. So
okay,
again,
so I guess
so there's biological, that's the whole species. Then there's social, there's different levels of society, so you can have like the broad level of the entire government or the smallest level of a family. But then there's individual, and that's where I was talking about, like I said in my preamble, that there's like a kind of individual selection, which happens with our own history, and that actually gets into how I trust my memory. I trust my memory because, because I'm still working on this mind, but it's something.
Well, let me jump in just to respond to the sociological aspect of this. Like the mnemonic capacities could also be problems that we could address on either of our systems. But just what I wrote of just the notes that I took on the the mimetic side of the problem that I found a couple of problems with it. The first one is that it doesn't seem to be indispensable, right? Like we both agreed from the outset that societies fail, and if we are part of a failing society, then and our linguistic elements.
Indispensability. I wasn't arguing for indispensability.
Oh no, I understand that. But my point is, because societies, there's nothing about. You can never look at a society and say, okay, this is going to last forever. This is not going to fail. And the problem is, well, okay, what if that's because the society doesn't have the kind of language game to play that keeps it surviving? No, because if you're part of that society and you get your language game from that society, and that is a failing society, then anytime you try to go to understand that communicably, you will be miscommunicating to yourself because you just are using the very.
Remember, I actually preempted that in the original comment. I said, even if the language I'm using comes from somewhere else, so again, there's different levels. So, so the way I see it, language games and language itself works on different levels. The language of a primitive tribe is not going to have as large a vocabulary as the language of the United States, the English language. The average American. The average American isn't going to have as dense a vocabulary as a scientist who is like who is in this or that field. And the scientist of this or that field isn't going to have as big a vocabulary as the top scientist of his field, right? The vocabulary increases, but the general grammar stays the same. The grammatical rules of each and every given language. And the ability to generate new words stays the same. So the idea is that this general grammar, this ability to generate new words, I suppose, and maybe I'm wrong, this is actually like scientific stuff. This is like, maybe that evolved at some earlier state, like something like primitive tribes and the like. They have a smaller vocabulary. They can make sense of fewer things than I can. There are fewer things they have to talk about. But the ability to talk with some degree of specificity, to order our words in such a way that we can understand on some level, on the lowest level of just a two-person speaking, right? You need two, right? On the lowest level of family, right? The ability for the wife to know that the husband wants them to stay here, for the husband to know that he has to go this way, for the child for the wife, for both of them to be able to alert to each other that they're going to die. So like an example I have, like one of my my diet of examples, Wittgenstein diet of examples, is if I am leaning down, and if there's only two, we're in a society of two. But we're both helping each other survive. So there's being in a society helps us. And we're like in the jungle, we're early primitive man, whatever. If that exists, right? There's a whole bunch of brush around us, around you, right? You're behind. You're sitting down. You're picking up, like, there's a bush in front of you, and there's berries, and you're picking berries, and I'm standing guard, and I see a lion behind you. And I say, "Lion!" and you look at me and you stop because you think I was yelling at you because you did something wrong. You then die. Our society has been selected against because you have not misunderstood the most basic level, the shout lion. It doesn't even have to shout lion. It could be just the shout bah, right? If you don't understand, like like there's a lion behind you, right? But like it could be something as simple as and a point, right? It could be something as simple as that. If you can't comprehend that, if you don't have the cognitive ability to comprehend that, you will die. And I might survive. I might be able to run away, but our society will have broken down. And so on the social level, will have been selected against. The people who who can't see those nuances in meaning. For the difference between another example I give is the wolf, which cannot tell the difference between a growl of threatening of territory, the growl of get out of my territory, and the hum of let's mate. If the wolf can't tell between those two, well, he's gonna think he can mate when the person wants him to get out of his territory, and he will die, or he's gonna think that he should get out of the territory when he's supposed to mate, and so he'll lose the chance to mate. Now that's like a biological level. This is where the biological and the social like sort of intersect. On a biological level, a social animal needs some means of communication. But that communication gets progressively more complex as the society itself gets more complex. So a society of two, at the very least, you should be able to understand that when I yell at you, when I make like a wolf makes a or something like that, it's a communication of there is a threat. And if you do not communicate, the society dies. The society suffers. So natural selection is still working at this level. Like natural selection continues to work at all levels. So natural selection can help social selection, or social selection can enact natural selection. I gotta close my door.
Yeah, go for it. I really need to take off here, but let me see if I can't.
You see, like understand this, like
what I like about this perspective is all of the interaction between. In other words, what I like, just to be very simple, what I like about this is it's not reductionistic. It doesn't try to deport all of the special properties and values of the sociological level to a biological level. It doesn't try to deport all of the biological stuff to ideas and concepts, like I think certain idealists do. It lets things be what they are and just has them interact, and I appreciate that. But I guess.
As opposed to
okay, that precisely that to me seems to be the issue. There is I believe in the equal ultimacy of part and whole, or of the individual and the society, the biology and the sociology. So from my perspective, when God creates a human being, it's not just the individual biology and psychology of a human being that defines them, but it's also in idea.
One moment. Wait, can I one moment?
Yeah, go for it.
All the way around. Oh, Oh yeah, I do. Hey, Sarah. Isaiah. Yeah. You want the apple cider? Yeah. Were you just at the? Where were you? Why are you wearing that? Yeah, fire prevention. All right, hurry up. Those were my nephews and nieces.
Awesome. Very cute.
Do you see them through the door over there?
Yeah, I did. I did, yeah.
Where was I? Or where were you? You were going to say something.
Yeah, and I really need to take off here, but I want to hear what your response is to this. So I come from the perspective that there's an equal ultimacy, that when God, sort of conceives of human beings and goes about creating them, it's not just their properties as parts, it's not just their qualities as individuals, but it's also how they interact that defines their very nature. But what I see as a problem is with emergentism, or the idea that there are holistic, or I should say, there are holistic systems or holistic qualities or properties which emerge, but which are not present in the original individuals, is that then you must be able to explain.
That's where okay, I get what you're saying. That's why I mentioned, like, in the actual comments, I'm not a materialist, right? I don't believe that there's this something from nothing emergence. I'm a damn, what's the term?
Property dualist, right?
No, I am I'm a property dualist, yeah, of sorts. But I'm not an
sure.
I'm not
or a neutral monist. There's all kinds of ways to.
Yeah, I know. I am a property dualist, at least presently. Like, that's my tentative conclusion. But there's a specific type of property dualism. I'm not an emergentist per se. I am a epiphenomenalist with leanings towards panpsychism. Right? I lean to panpsychism. Like that seemed like epiphenomenalism seems hard to defend. There are ways to defend it. Like, and I mentioned Aaron Voluntarist before. Like, I actually sort of been working on a solution to a problem he presented, which is sort of like a retake on the evolutionary arguments in naturalism, from like a philosophy of mind perspective. It's like really like it's like. So I've been working on a counter to that, but by virtue of my epiphenomenalism, I believe that the potential for society exists in the individual, and I, as a human, am a social animal. Like, my social nature it's part of what I am. It's part of my nature. I do believe in that. But the society itself emerges in the sense that you need two to tango. There has to be more than one person. It emerges in the sense that if it's just me deserted on an island, there's no society. I need at least two. But once there's two, you have a society. So it emerges in that, if that makes sense. I didn't mean emerge.
That does make sense. Yeah. Okay. There may be problems that could be presented against that, but for now,
there probably are.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't want to challenge that, because I don't think that's personally. I don't think that's. I don't think it would be conducive to get my challenge across. My challenge is more to the socially grounded reliability of communicability, or what linguistic specificity you're talking about, right? The problem is that I rely on memetics, or I rely on the social interface that I'm born in and grew up with, which occurs in beings who are not perfectly clear, right? Even I have a great ability to, actually, I in particular have a great ability to say things convolutedly and to use idiosyncratic language, or just to use the example that you said before, language needs to be able to work so that people can survive.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, and it seems to be twofold. On the one hand, if a society is dying out because of its lack of linguistic specificity, that is, it has a kind of incommunicability to it, and we are part of that society, then we may not have the linguistic components to even recognize our own failures. We may lack an ability to communicate with each other and work toward the progress of our society, which is why it's dying out. And if that were the case, we would be very screwed, because not only would we have this problem, but we wouldn't be able to deal with it. And the problem is, the only way to get out of that problem is to refer to another society. Well, that other society could have the same problem. So how do you get out of that one? Well, I could refer, maybe I'm from a different society. Well, that society could have the same problem, right? No matter where you go, there's no, unless you want to posit that some society is eternal, that it has some kind of perfect nature, perfect communication, perfect language, unless you're Hegel or Marx or somebody like that, there's not. It doesn't seem to me to be a way out of that problem. As soon as you're going to say there's a socially grounded communicability aspect to human beings, society doesn't seem sufficient to explain that. And really quick, the other side of that same coin, is, let's grant, for the sake of argument, that the problem I just said is somehow avoidable. Well, even if you have a society, or let's grant that a certain society is eternal and we just happen to be a part of this perfect society. Well, the problem there is you don't have to be participating in the society's perfection in order, or the society's language game, in order to be a member of society. In other words, society only needs to survive as a whole. You as a member do not need to survive. So even if you have this mimetic system, it doesn't actually say anything about you as an individual. It only says something about people as a whole, and you may not be participating.
So, on both points, I've actually I told you earlier, like, I'm working on the individual level. On the first level, so I as a member may not. Okay, so as to the first point, as to how if the society is failing due to a linguistic failure, well, there's going to be different types of societies. There's going to be different sizes of societies. For society to fail, so the smallest society is going to be 2 people, but you can also get up to like a million people, right? You can have China, 1 billion people. The types of communicative success needed will differ the more people. There's going to be a kind of stress. Like, you can think of language as like a load, like a loading system or something. Like, it can only carry so much weight, any given language. And once it goes over a certain weight, the system breaks and the society suffers. The point is, because there are different society sizes, there's different stresses that a kind of language can bear. So on a simple two-person society, the society will break. I've already told you the conditions under which a society breaks. The society breaks if you don't understand my tone. If you can't differentiate between the ba of "get away from me" and the ba of "you're in trouble" and the ba of "come, let's copulate," right? You need to be able to differentiate between these things so that we, as a society, can survive. Because if either one of us die in a member of the society of 2, the society dies. So the society has this pressure selected upon. But the thing is, the society of 2 doesn't need that much to survive in those for it to survive. Now, it won't survive for a long time, but it won't die because of communication. But it can have a perfectly good communicative failure and die because we die of old age. We die of old age. We fail to copulate. We're killed because not due to a failure of communication, but to a failure of our feet running fast enough or our weapons being sharp enough. Right? It wouldn't be a communication failure which causes the society of 2 to fall apart. It could be anything else. But the thing is, on the society of 2 level, but like, let's take it a bit bigger, on the society of the family, right? So on a familial level, our abilities are being selected for. We are teaching our children to speak, and they're catching our things. And if our speaking is any good, then our children will be able to mate with other things if we ever come across other society of families. So you have the society of 2, man and woman, and they produce another one, and they hand on their behaviors. Their behaviors are selected, are passed on. So you have that, you have this evolutionary process. You have the thing, the communicative system, and it's replicating itself, and that replication may be imperfect. It presumably is going to be imperfect, but is it good enough to survive in another society of two, to make another family, and then have a single child, and they go on and so forth, and that will allow for the behavior of that particular language to go on. The society of two doesn't have to worry about that much. There are about 3 cases in which there are like 3 cases in which the society of two is going to die due to a communicative failure. That's going to be and all of them are where it's not merely social selections happening, but natural selections happening at the same time. So the failure functions on the natural selective level as much on the social selective level. So the one case is we fail. I'm trying to tell you that we need to have babies, and you fail to understand. I'm trying to tell you to get away from me, or I will kill you, and you fail to understand. Or I'm trying to tell you to get away from a danger, or you'll die, and you fail to understand. In each one of those cases, your genes fail to be passed on, either because you don't copulate with me, or in the 2 cases, I kill you, or you die by failing to understand my signal that you are in trouble. In each of those cases, the social selection is happening. The language system we're using is being selected against, but it's being selected against by you dying, which is also natural selection. So social selection and natural selection overlap at that point. And because of that, the human individual's ability to learn language is selected for. Your ability to quickly learn language, your ability to quickly understand things, your ability to make these abductions as to what my meaning is selected for. Like, you need to be able to do this to survive. And if you don't, you die. You fail to pass on your genes. So on natural selection, it fails. So the reason the society as a whole is capable of surviving is twofold. First, we are linguistic animals. Like, as I said before, I sometimes will add on to we are natural. We humans are social rational animals. Sometimes I'll add on linguistic animals, because our language has been selected for. Our language is as much part of our nature as our society, because we have developed this predisposition to learn. And then, like, I can use a scientific. Children learn language. This is one of the things that Chomsky always talks about. Children learn language way faster than they should. They don't have enough data, but somehow they manage to make sense of stuff. They are somehow abducing the right answers really, really quickly, and that's weird. And I say, well, that's because we evolved that way. If we didn't learn that ability, we would have too many communicative failures and whatever. So that's the first level. We are linguistic animals. So when there is a linguistic failure on a higher level, we are already by nature geared to be able to resolve that issue. We as individuals are linguistic because of the natural selection that worked on simultaneously with the social selection. And on the other hand, we are capable of resolving it because we're geared to be able to resolve it, but also because there is still social selection going on. We can rely on other societies. So long as we have it so that we, as by nature, already have this issue, we can now rely on older societies and other societies, because at the basis, when you get to the smallest, it's the society of two, or the society of the family, and we already have this thing. So if other people had any type of success, we can rely on them, and if and to resolve our own failures, and we are predisposed to resolve this failures because we are by nature language-using animals. That solves the first problem. The second problem goes into. Do you have any problem with
that? Yeah, I think so, but just because I do need to take off soon, I'll let you have the last word there, and maybe we can pick that one up again too. But I am interested to hear what your response to the to the holistic problem, right? Like, how does being a member, I'm not sure if Aaron already, if he sort of beat me to the punchline there.
Well, Aaron's coming at it from a philosophy of mind perspective. My answer with that would be different.
Yeah. Okay. As long as, this is not I'm glad we agreed. I didn't take this to be a philosophy of mind problem. I took it more to be more a problem of holism versus atomism, and how we find some kind of middle ground.
So as for the individual, this is something I'm admittedly still working on, but the idea is I already have social selection and I already have so natural selection and social selection work together on that initial bit. So I am already a social and symbol using animal. I'm already a social and linguistic animal. I am already by nature geared to do this stuff. Given that, no matter what society I, as a member of this species, find myself in, by virtue of being a member of this species, of the human species, I am going to have some level of reliable cognitive faculties. As I gain new information from my society, as I am put into, say, an educational system, or as I am put into, say, Google Plus and have these discourses and am learning about these different methods of improving knowledge and whatnot, I am, as an individual, being affected. So my answer to the second issue is education. Individuals are educated. They learn. They take in information. I have a history, just as my society has a history, just as my species has a history. I, as an individual, have a history, and that's my memory. That's my everything I've learned up to this point.
Can I jump in there really? So I think you sound more educated than a lot of educated people that I'm talking to. Like, this is not a challenge to your education per se, but what if on this position, what if you were just educated to have bad linguistics, and that in fact happened to be what provides for our disagreement here, or worse,
what by nature predisposed. The fact that I'm capable of being wrong. We both agree this, right? This is, we got to bring back. This is always wrong, omniscient, right? We don't want to be either of those.
Yes,
I've already established. I think I've established that I am somewhere in there, right? I think
absolutely.
that biology
Absolutely.
lets me get it pretty close. Society lets me get closer, and now we're on this this singular level with individual history. Yes,
and really quick,
society, right? I could be. Go ahead.
But really quick, the problem seems to be a little bit. It's not just a matter of fallibility, but it's a matter of, well, even when you think you are agreeing with somebody else, perhaps your education has been to play this language game where you guys go on disagreeing, but you're making these sounds so that you cooperate, right? In other words, truth-conducive language doesn't. I'm not seeing why we believe that that's being supported by the system, right? Language that is conducive to survivability. Okay, granted. But
Okay.
Why is it conducive to the rationality of these two creatures?
Well, so there are various different parts of the belief forming mechanism, but there's, ultimately the thing is to create the belief, but then there's the actual mechanism. So the mechanism corresponds to our methodology. That's our means of obtaining knowledge, and then the beliefs just, our beliefs. The beliefs are true, given that they correspond with reality. The evidence that they correspond with reality is that they let us do useful things. So if I believe if I want to do like a magic trick, right, and I believe that if I show you my finger like this, you will think that it will look to you, given a sufficient amount of suspension of disbelief, that I'm missing a finger. And if I do this, it'll look to you that that I'm missing some of my finger, and if I put my finger over this, it'll hide that difference, and if I do this, it'll look like I'm, moving my finger, and I will succeeded in my goal of making you think that I am taking my finger away, right?
You're a magician.
That unique little magic trick requires me to have a whole bunch of different beliefs about you, about the world, about whatever, and yet I managed to get you to see the illusion, right? I've obtained the input that I was seeking as a test of whether or not this does what I think it does. Particularly make people of a certain personality type interested in whatever. The fact that I have succeeded in that, the fact that my beliefs lead me to my beliefs let me meet my desires, right? I have goals, I have desires, and I have beliefs which influence those desires. The fact that my beliefs let me meet my desires, or at least let me, is itself evidence to the truth truthiness of my belief. Now, how the truthiness? Now, how true the belief is? Again, I talked about this, the generalness. Maybe some of those like smaller beliefs, like beliefs of a certain personality type. Maybe of a certain personality type wouldn't be amused by it, but I thought that they would. But you just so happen to be in one of the personality types, which I have correctly classified, and so you laugh at it because you think it's funny or whatever. But other people would be completely unamused, who I think they would be amused. Well, yeah, my whole belief set is now wrong, but different parts of the belief is right, and I know it is because it's let me succeed in my actions. So that's the truth conditions of belief. But of the actual knowledge, of the methodology, the means by which I obtain knowledge, that can be selected for. Well, that is on the individual. So again, there's always three levels. There is the biological, social, and individual. And I'm talking on the individual level. If you want me to the other two, I'll do that as well. On the individual level, that's how I know that stuff. On the individual level, I know the means by which I obtain knowledge is useful is if by following them, I more often than not develop those beliefs which let me perform those skills. So why do I think abduction is good? Why do I think induction is good? Why do I think deduction is good? Why do I think criticism is useful? Why do I think this or this method of, this or this decision procedure is any good? Because it leads me to formulate beliefs or suspicions or propositions or whatever, which when I act on those propositions, I get responses which I desire. That's it.
Cool. Okay. I gotta. We should come back to this sometime, Frank. I gotta take off here, but or at least I gotta end the live so I can get ready to take off. But yeah, maybe in the future we can come back. I will take some notes on the stuff that was said here. I have the video to be posted. Anything you wanted to say before
I look forward
stop the broadcast?
I look forward to you showing me completely wrong.
Cool. Well, I'm not sure I can do that, but I do think I do think that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. So I will do my best. Cool. I'm gonna.